Welcome to this journey through one of the most unsettling cases ever recorded in the history of the United States. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time at which you're listening to this narration. We're eager to know how far these documented accounts travel and the moments of the day or night in which they find their listeners. In the autumn of 1837, the Crescent Hotel in New Orleans was filled with the city's wealthiest men. The auction that evening had drawn an uncommon level of interest, even for a city infamous as the largest slave market in the South. What made this particular sale extraordinary was not the number of human beings being offered, but the presence of a single woman who would soon become known throughout the city as the Swan, a name that would echo across the balconies of the French Quarter for decades to come. She stood 5 feet 4 inches tall, with skin described in the auction ledger as the color of fresh cream touched with the faintest whisper of caramel. Her eyes were a deep honey amber that shifted shade depending on the light, and her long, glossy black hair shimmered as it fell in loose waves down her back. The auctioneer, a man named Robert Whitford, introduced her simply as Lot Number 12. But everyone in attendance knew they were witnessing something unusual, as murmurs rippled through the room like waves rolling along the Mississippi River. The bidding began at a startling sum, more than 5 times the price of an ordinary domestic servant. What happened next would become one of the most peculiar chapters in New Orleans history, a city already infamous for its tangled racial hierarchies and the brutal economics of human bondage. This story would link powerful families, unearth long-buried secrets, and eventually lead to a string of disappearances that remained unsolved until 1963, when a renovation project at the old Bellamy house on Dauphine Street exposed a hidden chamber containing a leather-bound journal, 3 human finger bones, and a portrait of a woman whose beauty, even preserved in fading paint, seemed almost unreal. This is the story of Amara Whitfield, known to most as the Swan, and the terrifying truth behind her disappearance in the winter of 1842. The auction that night in 1837 was documented by multiple witnesses, including Jonathan Pierce, a northern merchant visiting New Orleans to establish river trade connections. In his diary, recovered from his Boston estate in 1951, Pierce described the scene with visible discomfort. "I have never witnessed such frenzy among gentlemen of standing as occurred tonight at the Crescent Exchange. The woman on sale was indeed remarkable in appearance, yet their behavior seemed driven by something beyond mere desire for human property. One could detect an almost ritualistic fervor in their bidding, as though acquiring this particular woman held significance beyond material value." What Pierce could not have known was the labyrinth of history surrounding the woman before him. Amara Whitfield had not been born enslaved, nor had she arrived through the usual channels of the domestic slave trade. According to New Orleans port records, she had arrived 3 weeks earlier aboard a ship called the Blue Heron, listed not as cargo, but as a passenger traveling with a merchant named Lucas Granger. But by the time the ship docked, Granger was dead, supposedly from a fever contracted during a stop in Havana. With no free papers found among Granger's belongings, Amara was seized by port authorities and eventually placed for auction. This much was public record. What wasn't known until the Bellamy journal was found was why a woman of such obvious schooling and refinement had ended up in such circumstances, and why several powerful families in New Orleans seemed determined to ensure she would never leave the city. To understand the events that followed, one must understand the New Orleans of 1837, a complex patchwork of cultures, classes, and racial classifications more intricate than anywhere else in America. Following the Louisiana Purchase, the city had shifted from a French and Spanish colonial outpost into a booming American port where fortunes rose and crumbled in the trades of cotton, sugar, and human beings. A 3-tier racial system divided the city into white, enslaved black, and free people of color, The latter often wealthy, educated, and property-owning. It was a city of contradictions. Brutal slave markets stood steps away from opera houses. Elegant Creole balls existed alongside the horror of human auctions. Within this maze of beauty and brutality landed Amara Whitfield, a woman whose ancestry, if known, could alter the balance of power for several old Louisiana families. The winning bid that night came from Colonel Silas Bellamy, a wealthy sugar planter whose family had been in Louisiana since the earliest French settlements. Bellamy paid the astonishing sum of $7,400, enough to purchase an entire crew of field laborers for a woman who, according to all accounts, had no experience with domestic service. The notary who recorded the transaction noted something odd. Bellamy insisted she be listed not as a slave, but as a ward to be housed in his Dauphine Street residence. What happened after Amara arrived at the Bellamy home remains murky. Servants interviewed decades later recalled that she was treated not as a servant, but as a guest, given her own chamber, fine clothing, and access to the family dining table. Yet she was never seen leaving the property, and visitors were told she was a distant relative from Charleston who spoke little English. Within 2 weeks, Bellamy's wife Margaret left for her family estate in Natchez with her 3 children. She would not return for 6 months. During this time, Silas Bellamy closed his home to all visitors and conducted business entirely through written correspondence. And then, in early 1838, something happened that would echo through the next century. Dr. Samuel Carter, a respected New Orleans physician, was summoned to the Bellamy home in January of 1838. He had attended to the Bellamy family before, but this time he was led not to the children's rooms, nor to Mrs. Bellamy's chambers, but to a quiet guest room at the far end of the hall. There he found Amara, seated upright in bed, a thin blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders despite the warmth of the room. She greeted him in clear, articulate English, contradicting Silas Bellamy's earlier claims that she barely spoke the language. Dr. Carter wrote in his medical ledger, "Patient shows symptoms of respiratory distress, consistent with mild consumption, yet her overall health appears sound. What troubles me more is her demeanor, alert, perceptive, deeply uneasy as though carrying knowledge she fears to speak aloud." He recorded that when Bellamy briefly left the room, Amara seized the moment to ask a single question. "Doctor, do you know where my papers are? My true papers?" Before he could ask what she meant, Bellamy returned, and Amara fell instantly silent. Rumors soon spread through the city about the mysterious woman hidden in the Bellamy house. Some said she was Bellamy's illegitimate daughter. Others whispered she was his mistress. But the most persistent gossip linked her to the Marquette family, one of the oldest, wealthiest, and most secretive lineages in Louisiana. Henry Marquette, the aging patriarch, had also been one of the fiercest bidders at the auction before Bellamy outbid him. What interest could such a powerful family have had in a woman newly arrived from Havana? Answers began to surface more than a century later, but at the time, the city merely whispered and speculated. Amara herself, trapped in the Bellamy home, began keeping notes in a journal she found hidden inside an armoire. Her first entries were simple observations: weather, meals, the sound of street musicians drifting up from the French Quarter. But gradually, they darkened. February 9th, 1838. "Mr. Bellamy has forbidden me from leaving the inner courtyard. He says it is for my protection. From whom? He will not say. I fear the story he told me about my papers being processed is a lie meant to keep me docile." March 12, 1838. "A man named Marquette came today. Elderly, stern. He stared at me as if memorizing my face. He and Mr. Bellamy spoke in low French about resemblance and lineage. They believed I did not understand. They were wrong." By April, Amara realized Bellamy had no intention of helping her secure freedom. He had lied about the paperwork, confiscated every document she had arrived with, and kept her confined as though she were a dangerous secret rather than a human being. In late July, she attempted her first escape. She entrusted a housemaid named Ruth with a message addressed to the U.S. consulate explaining her situation and claiming birth in Philadelphia. But the maid betrayed her. Bellamy confronted her the next morning, furious, declaring she would be moved to his plantation upriver and placed under stricter supervision. The journal recorded her devastation in a single line. August 3rd, 1838. It was a trap. Tomorrow I am to be taken away. For nearly a month, the journal is silent. When the entries resume, Amara is no longer in the Bellamy home, but on Cypress Gate Plantation, 50 miles upriver. She writes of being confined to the former overseer's cottage, guarded not by chains, but by isolation. She was allowed no visitors, no letters, and no contact with the outside world, apart from a single attendant, an older woman named Martha. Life on the plantation was suffocating. Amara was hidden away from both the enslaved workers and the Bellamy family. She was neither servant nor member of the household. She was a secret, quarantined from the world. Then in October of 1838, her story intersected with a man who would later become a pivotal figure in abolitionist history. Dr. Joseph Warren, a northern physician who had infiltrated Louisiana plantations under the guise of studying slave health. Warren managed to speak with Amara under the pretense of checking her lungs. His notes, deciphered decades later, read, "The woman claims to have been born free, says her mother was a free woman of color from Philadelphia and her father a white merchant of French descent. She believes her captivity is tied to inheritance, not slavery. Warned me to be cautious, for the matter involves wealthy families who will not hesitate to silence anyone interfering." Warren attempted to help her, but 2 weeks later he was discovered, beaten, and forced to flee the state disguised as a riverboat laborer. Amara's only hope vanished with him. Winter descended on the plantation. The journal entries grew fewer, darker, tinged with despair. She wrote of overhearing the plantation manager speaking with a visitor about the Marquette line and the problem of verification. She sensed she was at the center of something larger, something dangerous. Then in late February of 1839, an unexpected visitor arrived, the elderly Henry Marquette himself. He dismissed Martha, closed the door, and spoke to Amara not as a master nor a captor, but as a man terrified. He asked about her mother, whether she had ever worn a gold locket with an engraving of a riverboat. She confirmed it. He asked whether she knew the truth of her father's death. She told him what her mother had always claimed, that her father, a French merchant, had died at sea shortly before Amara's birth. At this, the old man's face changed. He whispered, "Your mother told only part of the truth," and left. He promised to return, but he never did. 3 days later, Henry Marquette was found dead in his study, supposedly from natural causes. But his death ignited a legal war over the vast Marquette estate, a war that would spiral into disappearances, murders, and eventually into the mystery that still haunts New Orleans today. In the months following Henry Marquette's death, Amara's situation grew even more precarious. The patriarch's passing triggered a bitter inheritance battle. With no surviving sons, the estate was expected to pass to Henry's nephew, Laurent Marquette, a man rumored to be both ambitious and dangerously clever. But whispers circulated that Henry had once fathered a child outside of marriage many years before, and that the child might have been legitimate under old French colonial law. If that child existed, and if that child had a child of their own, then someone like Amara Whitfield could threaten the entire Marquette inheritance. Amara didn't know this for certain, but by April 1839, she had begun to understand that the interest in her had little to do with slavery and everything to do with lineage. Her journal reflects this dawning fear. April 10, 1839. Mr. Bellamy stormed into my cottage today, demanding to know what Henry told me. He searched my room, my clothes, even my mother's Bible. He took the Bible when he left, along with my birth certificate, my last proof of myself. After that day, Bellamy visited less frequently, but the tension in the air grew sharper. Servants avoided her eyes. Martha seemed frightened of something unseen. Amara sensed the plantation was holding its breath. The next months passed in agonizing uncertainty until early June, when she made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden inside the lining of an old traveling cloak, the only item she still possessed from the journey with Lucas Granger, she found a folded, brittle sheet. It was a letter written by her mother decades earlier, addressed to a man whose name she had never heard before, Jean-Baptiste Marquette. The letter confirmed the truth Amara had long suspected. Her mother and Jean-Baptiste had married in Philadelphia in 1816 while he was estranged from his family. Though Jean-Baptiste died the following year, their marriage, if validated, would make Amara his legitimate heir under the blend of French and American laws governing Louisiana at the time. She finally understood why Bellamy had purchased her at any price, why the Marquettes had shown such interest, why the elderly Henry Marquette had looked at her with such haunted recognition. She was not a servant. She was not an orphan of the trade. She was the last living descendant of a man whose fortune threatened to rewrite the social order of New Orleans. The revelation filled her with both hope and terror, and it spurred her to action. June 17, 1839. I must run. I must find the documents before Bellamy destroys everything. I will not die here, hidden like a secret no one dares acknowledge. Her chance came 3 months later. On September 3, 1839, a riverboat stopped at Cypress Gate Plantation to load sugar for transport to New Orleans. Martha, the only person Amara halfway trusted, agreed to assist her in exchange for the pearl earrings Amara's mother had given her before the journey south. Amara waited until twilight, slipped aboard the boat among the barrels, and hid until they departed. By the following night, she was back in New Orleans. What followed was 3 years of silence. No records, no sightings, only a single clue. A receipt from a French Quarter apothecary dated September 7, 1839, charged to none other than the legendary healer and occult figure, Marie Laveau. Historians believe Laveau sheltered Amara, providing her with new clothing, a safe room, and perhaps passage north. But instead of fleeing north, Amara stayed in New Orleans, working quietly to locate the documents Bellamy had stolen from her. Her birth certificate, the letter, any proof tying her to the Marquette line. Meanwhile, Laurent Marquette secured the inheritance in 1841, presenting a polished case to the courts and ensuring that no potential claimants emerged. His victory was celebrated in high society, but those close to him claimed he never rested easy afterwards. He knew the real threat still existed somewhere in the city. A young woman whose very existence could unravel his fortunes. Then in January 1842, Amara returned, not in hiding, but in astonishing fashion. The annual masquerade ball at the Crescent Hotel glittered with jewels, silk, and layers of Southern extravagance. Politicians, planters, merchants, and French Creole elites filled the hall. Masks concealed little. Everyone knew everyone else's business in New Orleans. But when Laurent Marquette entered the ballroom with a stunning woman on his arm, the room fell silent. Amara was dressed in a gown of deep sapphire silk that shimmered under the chandeliers. Her hair was pinned with pearls. Her posture was regal. She looked not like a former captive, nor like an orphan of the trade, but like the rightful descendant of an old Louisiana dynasty. Whispers spread instantly. Is that? It cannot be. She looks like... No, impossible. Silas Bellamy, also attending the ball, saw her and went pale. He tried to approach her, forcing his way through the guests, but several men restrained him. Some said he shouted that she was his property. Others claimed he began raving about documents and stolen lineage. Whatever the truth, he fled the ballroom shortly after. The next morning, Bellamy filed a legal complaint accusing Laurent Marquette of unlawfully taking possession of a woman belonging to the Bellamy estate. The complaint was withdrawn within a day. Whether he was threatened, bribed, or silenced remains unknown. Then on February 12, 1842, Laurent Marquette and Amara Whitfield boarded a steamship bound for France. They were listed on the passenger log as L.M. and Ward. They left behind a city ablaze with speculation. They also left behind something else. 15 days later, the Bellamy family vanished. The Dauphine Street mansion stood eerily empty. Clothes hung in wardrobes, food rested on plates. Lamps burned low, but the family, Silas, Margaret, their 3 children and 2 household men, had disappeared without a trace. And New Orleans whispered again, this time with fear. In the weeks following the Bellamy disappearance, New Orleans pulsed with rumors darker than anything the city had whispered before. What had happened inside the great house on Dauphine Street? Why had the lamps been left burning, the doors unlocked, meals half-eaten on the table? Why had no one heard a struggle or cry? Some claimed the family fled creditors. Others insisted it was the wrath of spirits, a fashionable explanation in a city where superstition clung to the air like humidity. But most residents suspected something far more human and far more sinister. For in early March 1842, 2 bodies surfaced from the cypress swamps north of the city. The bodies of Bellamy's private secretary and his plantation overseer from Cypress Gate. Each had been killed by a single bullet to the head, execution style. Their pockets were empty, rings removed, boots stripped. Whoever killed them had not intended for them to be found. Detective James Monroe, one of the few honest officers in the New Orleans constabulary, led the investigation. His reports, preserved by chance in a church archive, noted, individuals connected to this matter display remarkable reluctance to speak. It is my belief that those with knowledge of the Bellamy disappearance fear forces beyond ordinary law. Within months, the investigation was quietly suspended. Years passed. Decades. The city grew. The Bellamy case sank into legend, a whispered tale told by carriage drivers and French quarter guides. Cypress Gate Plantation changed hands. The Dauphine Street mansion stood empty, decaying under vines and moss until it became known as the Quiet House, a place children avoided after sunset. Then, more than a century later, the truth began to surface. In 1963, while restoring the long-abandoned Bellamy mansion, contractors discovered a sealed doorway behind a crumbling plaster wall. Inside was a narrow, hidden room no larger than a pantry. Dust coated everything. A small table sat in the corner, beside it a wooden crate. Within the crate, they found 3 items: a leather-bound journal, 3 finger bones wrapped in faded cloth, and a portrait of a woman that immediately caught the restorer's breath. Even through cracked varnish and peeling pigments, Amara Whitfield stared out with an expression of quiet defiance. Her amber eyes seemed to glow. She wore a blue gown, deep, luminous, unmistakably similar to the dress described at the 1842 masquerade ball. Historians swarmed the site, eager to examine the find. The journal was quickly identified as Amara's own, written in her careful hand from her days at the Bellamy home through her captivity at Cypress Gate. The finger bones underwent forensic testing, but the remains were too degraded for conclusive identification. Some whispered they belonged to Silas Bellamy. Others insisted they were his secretaries. Still others speculated the bones were kept by someone else entirely, someone who wanted a reminder of unfinished vengeance. But the portrait held the greatest secret. In 1975, art conservators performed an X-ray analysis on the painting. Beneath Amara's likeness lay another portrait, painted years earlier. A man, a woman, and a small child. Comparing the features to old Marquette family paintings, experts identified the hidden subjects as Jean-Baptiste Marquette, his wife Marie Reynolds, and their infant daughter, Amara herself. The painting had been buried beneath another painting, one identity concealed beneath another, as if someone had tried to hide the truth but couldn't bear to destroy it. The discovery reignited interest in the case, but the answers were still incomplete. Why had Amara chosen to paint herself over her family? Why leave the painting hidden in a house she had fled? And what became of her after boarding that steamship in 1842? Those answers arrived unexpectedly in 1981. That summer, an unusually severe drought lowered the Mississippi River to historic lows. Areas normally underwater lay dry and cracked. A fisherman discovered an old flatboat half buried in mud near the site of the former Cypress Gate plantation. Inside were skeletal remains, 4 bodies, a man, a woman, and 2 adult males. All had been killed by gunshot to the head. Personal items were found near the bones, a pocket watch engraved with SB, a woman's locket containing miniature portraits of 3 children, and scraps of formal clothing typical of the 1840s. The children in the locket strongly resembled the Bellamy offspring based on surviving descriptions. Historians concluded the obvious. The Bellamy family had not fled. They had been taken. The secretary and overseer had died first in the swamps. The family followed soon after, executed and sunk in the Mississippi. Their disappearance designed to look like a midnight flight. But the most chilling question remained. Who ordered it? The answer came more than a decade later. In 1993, during a renovation of the old Marquette estate outside New Orleans, a mason dismantling an ornate fireplace mantel discovered a narrow cavity hidden behind a carved panel. Inside was a small leather pouch sealed with wax. Within the pouch was a confession, handwritten and dated February 25, 1842. 2 days before the Bellamy family vanished. It was signed by Laurent Marquette. The confession was brief, blunt, and cold. He admitted that Silas Bellamy posed a threat not only to Amara's claim to freedom, but to Marquette family wealth. Bellamy's financial ties to Henry Marquette had made him unpredictable. Laurent wrote that for the safety of both himself and Amara, the elimination of the Bellamys has become unavoidable. He described arranging for the children to be taken away first to Havana under the care of Martha, the same woman who had guarded Amara at Cypress Gate. He called this act a mercy requested by A. The execution of the adults, Laurent wrote, had been entrusted to reliable men. He left no names. He ended with a single chilling line: "The bodies will never be found." He was wrong. But by the time the bodies surfaced, everyone involved had long since vanished into history. The final question, what became of Amara herself, would not be answered until the early 2000s, when DNA testing connected the finger bones found in the hidden room to remains in a London cemetery. Amara Whitfield, later known as Amara Marquette, had lived until 1873, a free, wealthy woman in Europe, her past hidden even from her children. But the ghosts she left in New Orleans never rested. Not completely. Amara's life in Europe remained a mystery for more than a century, known only through fragments, immigration records, a few letters, and a London burial register listing her as Amara M., formerly of America. But in 1958, long before DNA testing or advanced forensics, an elderly woman named Margaret Wilson arrived in New Orleans claiming to be Amara's great-granddaughter. She carried a worn satchel filled with letters she said had been written by Amara from London between 1852 and 1868. The letters described a life far removed from the nightmare of Cypress Gate. Amara and Laurent had married in France, where racial laws that would have forbidden their union in Louisiana held no sway. Their early years in Paris were filled with quiet comfort, funded by what the letters described only as a private settlement. They later moved to London, where they raised 2 sons and a daughter. But the letters also revealed that Amara never fully escaped the shadows of her past. In one, dated March 1857, she wrote, "There are days when I wake with the smell of river mud in my lungs and the sound of footsteps on wooden floors. I still dream of the cottage at Cypress Gate and the look in Mr. Bellamy's eyes when he realized I would never belong to him. Perhaps time will soften these memories, perhaps not." However, the most disturbing letter, the one that historians argue could have rewritten the case entirely, was dated October 1867. In it, Amara wrote, "I am haunted still by what Laurent felt forced to arrange that February night in New Orleans. Though he insists the children were spared and sent away beforehand, I did not see them myself. If they survived, they would be adults now, living under names unknown to me. It is this alone that keeps me awake at night, for I cannot decide if mercy or fear guided his actions." The letters raise more questions than answers. Why did Amara question the children's fate if Martha had taken them to safety? Why did Laurent conceal the arrangement even from her? And what exactly had happened inside the Bellamy home that night? But the letters never reached authentication. Days after Margaret Wilson submitted them to the Louisiana Historical Society, she died suddenly of a heart attack in her boarding house. The letters vanished during a routine office renovation, officially explained as an accidental disposal, though many suspect they were stolen or destroyed. With Wilson's death, a potential bridge between Amara's past and present collapsed. Then, in 1976, researcher Thomas Green made an astonishing discovery. While combing through old shipping manifests at Tulane University, he found a record from March 1842 documenting 3 children traveling unaccompanied from New Orleans to Havana. Their listed ages matched those of the Bellamy children. Their surname was recorded as Reynolds, Amara's mother's maiden name. Their guardian was listed as Martha Bernard, the same Martha who had once watched over Amara at Cypress Gate. If the record was genuine, it confirmed that the Bellamy children had indeed survived. But what happened to them afterward is unknown. Cuban archives hold no further trace, no graves, no census records, no marriage registers. It is as though the children stepped off the ship into Havana and then dissolved into the world. Some historians believe they were sent onward to France or Spain. Others argue they might have been taken in by free black families in Havana, raised with new names and new identities. A few even suggest they were instructed never to return to the United States, for their existence alone could unravel the settlement Laurent had arranged for Amara. Whatever the truth, the children disappeared from history just as completely as their parents. Years later, another piece of the puzzle surfaced in a tragic and eerie way. In the summer of 1981, the Mississippi River shrank to a muddy skeleton. The drought exposed sandbars and rotted wood, and near the ruins of Cypress Gate, a fisherman discovered a half-submerged flatboat sealed with rusted chains. Inside were skeletal remains, 4 adults, a man, a woman, and 2 other males, all shot execution style.
Items in the boat included a man's pocket watch engraved SB and a tiny locket containing portraits of the Bellamy children. The bodies matched the ages and composition of those missing from the Bellamy household: Silas, Margaret, the secretary, and the plantation overseer. The discovery confirmed what had long been the whispered truth. The Bellamys did not vanish, they were erased. By whom and why? The 1993 discovery of Laurent Marquette's hidden confession provided part of the answer, but his words were cold, calculated, the confession of a man protecting wealth and lineage. Amara's letters, in contrast, were full of guilt and unease. It became clear she had not known the full extent of Laurent's actions until much later. Even so, the most haunting clue emerged in 2002 when DNA testing identified the finger bones found in the Bellamy mansion's hidden room. Though degraded, the genetic markers closely matched those of the Bellamy line, specifically Silas Bellamy. Someone, almost certainly Laurent or his men, had placed part of Silas's remains inside Amara's former prison beside her own journal and the hidden portrait of her family. Whether this was meant as a symbol, a warning, or a message to Amara remained unclear. One thing was certain: whatever happened to the Bellamys had been thorough, methodical, and deeply personal. As for Amara, she lived the rest of her life in England, becoming a respected hostess in London society. She died in 1873 of an illness described as lingering fatigue of the lungs, perhaps a remnant of the consumption that once plagued her. Laurent followed her 6 years later. Her children went on to marry into prominent British families. None of them ever returned to America. None of them, according to records, ever learned who their mother truly was. In New Orleans, the old Bellamy mansion became a small boutique hotel. Guests often reported hearing footsteps in the halls late at night or seeing a figure in a blue gown reflected in mirrors. Most unnerving of all were the accounts of whispered laughter drifting from the hidden room. That laughter that seemed neither joyous nor cruel, but triumphant. As the years passed, the story of Amara Whitefield, the Swan, grew into something more than a mystery. It became a symbol of the city itself, beautiful, haunted, layered with secrets. And as the historians dug deeper, the ground beneath New Orleans seemed to shift, because every truth they uncovered only hinted at another truth buried deeper.
By the late 1990s, the story of Amara Whitefield had gained renewed attention among scholars. What was once dismissed as a ghost tale or regional legend was now recognized as one of the most complex documented cases of identity, inheritance, and violence in the antebellum South. But even with the confessions, the journal, the uncovered bodies, and the portrait, there still remained one crucial gap: the final link between Amara's hidden identity and the forces that had tried to destroy or control her. That link surfaced unexpectedly in 2004 during a digital archive project undertaken by the historic Louisiana Library. As part of the initiative, thousands of old letters, deeds, and wills were scanned into searchable form. Among them was a sealed envelope from the Marquette collection that had been misfiled since the 1930s. Inside was a short letter written in 1841 by Judge Émile Robichaud, a close confidant of Henry Marquette. It read, "The old man fears he may not outlive the contest brewing between his nephew and the girl. He remains convinced the child of Jean-Baptiste lives and that she will return to stake a claim her mother could not. Should proof of the marriage be discovered, Lawrence's position collapses instantly. The Bellamy fellow is reckless, but holds certain papers we must retrieve before they fall into the wrong hands." This letter, written months before Amara's reappearance, confirmed what many had suspected. Henry Marquette had been aware of Amara's identity long before she entered his home at Cypress Gate. He had known she was legitimate. He had known she was a threat to Lawrence's claim, and, most importantly, He had known that Bellamy was holding documents that could shift the inheritance. But why had Henry not acted sooner? Why had he allowed her to fall into Bellamy's hands in the first place? For years, scholars theorized Henry believed he had more time, that Amara might never discover who she was, that the matter might die quietly with him. But the frantic tone of the Robichaud letter suggests otherwise. Henry knew time was running out. Perhaps he was already in failing health. Perhaps he hesitated because acknowledging Amara publicly would upend the rigid racial hierarchies the Marquette family benefited from. Or perhaps he feared Laurent more than the world ever realized. Whatever his reasons, Henry died before taking action, and his silence set in motion a chain of events that could not be undone. After the discovery of the Robichaud letter, historians revisited Amara's journal. One entry, dated shortly after Henry's unexpected visit to Cypress Gate, took on chilling significance. He asked if my mother ever wore the locket with the riverboat engraved. When I told him yes, his face broke like a man who had lost something he prayed still lived. He said she had been too prudent. I wonder now if he meant too prudent to reveal the truth or too prudent to trust him with it. If Henry had recognized the locket, it meant he had seen it before, perhaps given it as a gift to his son Jean-Baptiste or to Marie Reynolds herself. The locket, later discovered in the hidden room of the Bellamy mansion, engraved with J.M. and M.R., confirmed as much. It had survived oceans, auction blocks, plantations, hidden rooms, and generations, only to emerge long after both families were gone. As the locket became the centerpiece of museum exhibits on New Orleans history, something strange happened. Visitors reported feeling an unsettling pull when standing before the portrait of Amara, as if her amber eyes followed them, not with accusation, but with expectation, as if daring the viewer to see not just her pain, but also her power. Tour guides claimed that the portrait unsettled them most during Mardi Gras season. Year after year, just before Lent, the museum received reports of faint tapping sounds coming from the wall where the portrait hung, a sound like knuckles against old wood. Maintenance staff found nothing. The tapping always stopped when someone entered the room. No one knew what to make of it, and the museum kept such reports quiet. But the city knew. New Orleans always knows. Meanwhile, genealogists continued tracking the descendants of the Marquette family in Europe. Though many documents were lost to war, fire, and time, one discovery in 2011 added a new layer to the mystery. A descendant living in Sussex had kept a small locked box inherited from an ancestor believed to be Laurent Marquette's eldest son. Inside were 3 items: a brooch shaped like a swan, a faded letter written in French, and a miniature portrait of Amara painted decades after her death. The letter, addressed to Laurent's daughter Isabel, contained instructions. Burn this after reading. Your mother's history is hers alone. Do not seek the truth of New Orleans. Some stories are too heavy for the living to carry. Isabel did not burn the letter. Her son kept it. His granddaughter inherited it. And now, nearly 180 years later, the letter sits in a museum beside the portrait of Amara, the swan brooch pinned beside it like a signature. But even with these revelations, the central question nagged at scholars. Was Amara complicit, even indirectly, in what happened to the Bellamys? No direct proof has ever surfaced. Laurent's confession placed the responsibility entirely on himself. The murders were premeditated, calculated, executed by hired men. But one line in Amara's 1867 letter hinted at something darker. I did not know of the plan until it was done, yet the choice he made was made for my sake. And what does that make me, if not stained by it? She lived the rest of her life with that question. Whether guilt or simply the weight of survival haunted her dreams, no one could say. What is certain is that Amara, more than anyone, understood the price of freedom in a world where her existence was a threat to powerful men. By the late 1910s,
a final theory began circulating among historians, one not easily proven, yet disturbingly plausible. It suggested that Bellamy's obsession with Amara had less to do with money and more to do with control, that he had known her mother in Philadelphia long before purchasing Amara, that hers was not the first mother-daughter pair whose papers had vanished during his dealings in Havana. This theory remains unproven, but it cast a new shadow across the Bellamy disappearance. Perhaps Laurent had not just eliminated a financial threat, perhaps he removed a predator the law never would have punished. In New Orleans, the debate continues. In Europe, the Marquette descendants speak her name with quiet reverence. And in the small hotel that now occupies the Dauphine Street mansion, guests still report a woman's laughter echoing through the halls, soft, distant, triumphant. The laughter of someone who won. But victory, as Amara's life proved, never comes without cost.
In the years that followed the rediscovery of Amara Whitfield's story, New Orleans embraced her legacy as both a cultural artifact and a ghost that refused to be silenced. Historians, genealogists, and journalists revisited every corner of her life: the Crescent Hotel, Dauphine Street, Cypress Gate Plantation, and the archives where her letters and fragments now lived. Yet each new discovery seemed only to deepen the mystery surrounding the woman once known as the Swan. One of the most surprising revelations surfaced in 2019, when a team of forensic imaging specialists examined the hidden portrait beneath Amara's painting with modern spectral scanners. The analysis revealed something few had ever suspected. The second layer of paint, the image of Amara in the blue gown, had been applied by the same hand that painted the original family portrait beneath it. The strokes, pressure, pigment mixtures, and the faint signature hidden in the underlayer all matched. Amara had painted over her own family. The realization stunned researchers. Why would she bury the only surviving image of her parents and infant self under a portrait of her adult identity? Why not destroy the original if secrecy was her aim, or preserve it openly if reclaiming her heritage was the goal? The prevailing interpretation is as poetic as it is haunting. Amara chose to become her own witness, her own proof, her own legacy. The portrait was not only a concealment, it was a reclamation. Her mother had hidden the truth to protect her. Henry Marquette had suppressed it to preserve the family's reputation. Laurent had leveraged it for power. Amara alone had chosen to transform it. A canvas of what she was beneath, a canvas of who she became above. A layered identity, like New Orleans itself. Beauty painted over sorrow, truth hidden behind survival. As scholars embraced new interpretations, the city's residents added their own layers of myth. Taxi drivers claimed that every February, the month of both Amara's escape and the Bellamy disappearance, a faint feminine humming drifted through the corridors of the Dauphine Street Hotel. Housekeeping staff swore that when they entered the hidden room, the air would suddenly feel cool, even on the hottest days. The manager dismissed these tales, but the staff whispered them with conviction. Older residents of the French Quarter embraced the stories. One elderly Creole woman who lived nearby claimed that as a girl she once looked into the empty windows of the mansion and saw a woman in a blue gown gazing back with an expression that was not sorrow nor anger, but resolve. She never forgot the face. Historians, of course, rejected such accounts as folklore. But New Orleans has always lived comfortably between fact and legend, between the documented and the whispered, between the living and the dead. Still, what could not be dismissed were the final archival discoveries that surfaced in 2021 and 2022. In 2021, a London church archivist digitizing old correspondence stumbled upon a letter written by Amara herself in 1871, 2 years before her death. Addressed to an unnamed confidant, it read, "I sense that my time is drawing to a close, and there is peace in that. My children flourish, unaware of the river that carried me here. Let it remain so. I would not have them burdened by the sins of men who sought to claim or silence me. I pray only that history will remember not the violence that followed my footsteps, but the truth of my existence. I was born free, though the world denied it. I was nearly unmade, yet I endured. It is one of the few documents where Amara acknowledges her past directly, and it is the closest she ever came to confessing what she knew or didn't know about the Bellamy family's fate. Then, in 2022, during a renovation of a London townhouse once owned by the Marquette family, a sealed trunk was found beneath a stairwell. Inside were travel ledgers, children's drawings, a few pieces of jewelry, and a vellum envelope addressed simply, "For my descendants." The letter inside was brief. "The story of my life cannot be told without the darkness, but I choose to leave you the light. If the past calls to you, search with compassion, not judgment. And if New Orleans whispers, as it often does, listen, but do not follow." Signed, A.W. Her initials. Nothing more. After this discovery, interest in Amara's life surged once again. Documentaries were produced, books written, tours created. But despite the worldwide fascination, the core of Amara Whitfield's story remained where it always belonged, in New Orleans. Today, visitors to the historic Louisiana Museum can stand before her portrait and the hidden family painting beneath it. The gold locket discovered in the Bellamy mansion rests in a glass case beside them, the engraving of a riverboat still visible despite the centuries. Her journal, fragile and fading, lies preserved under archival glass. Yet it is the space between these artifacts that tells the real story. The blank lines, the silences, the unanswered questions. The choices she made, the choices made for her. And the cost of survival. The Dauphine Street mansion, now a boutique hotel, includes the hidden room as part of its guided tour. Guests often linger there, hoping to feel something, a chill, a whisper, a shift in the air. Some claim they have. Most feel nothing, but almost all leave with a sense that the place remembers. On quiet nights in the French Quarter, when the gas lamps flicker against the cobblestones and the Mississippi carries its slow secrets past the levee, it is said that a woman's voice can sometimes be heard, neither mournful nor angry, but steady. A voice that belongs not to a ghost, but to a memory that refuses to fade. For the story of Amara Whitfield, the Swan, is not merely a tale of hidden rooms and riverboats, of lost lineage and forbidden inheritance, of disappearances and reappearances. It is a story of a woman who refused to be erased even by the most powerful forces of her time. A woman who painted herself into history. A woman who survived long enough to reclaim her name. A woman whose descendants walk the world unaware of the fire that shaped their bloodline. As historians often say, the story isn't really about the Bellamys or the Marquettes or even New Orleans. In the years that followed the rediscovery of Amara Whitfield's story, New Orleans embraced her legacy as both a cultural artifact and a ghost that refused to be silenced. Historians, genealogists, and journalists revisited every corner of her life. The Crescent Hotel, Dauphine Street, Cypress Gate Plantation, and the archives where her letters and fragments now lived. Yet each new discovery seemed only to deepen the mystery surrounding the woman once known as the Swan. One of the most surprising revelations surfaced in 2019, when a team of forensic imaging specialists examined the hidden portrait beneath Amara's painting with modern spectral scanners. The analysis revealed something few had ever suspected. The second layer of paint, the image of Amara in the blue gown, had been applied by the same hand that painted the original family portrait beneath it. The strokes, pressure, pigment mixtures, and the faint signature hidden in the underlayer all matched. Amara had painted over her own family. The realization stunned researchers. Why would she bury the only surviving image of her parents and infant self under a portrait of her adult identity? Why not destroy the original if secrecy was her aim, or preserve it openly if reclaiming her heritage was the goal? The prevailing interpretation is as poetic as it is haunting. Amara chose to become her own witness, her own proof, her own legacy. The portrait was not only a concealment, it was a reclamation. Her mother had hidden the truth to protect her. Henry Marquette had suppressed it to preserve the family's reputation. Laurent had leveraged it for power. Amara alone had chosen to transform it. A canvas of what she was beneath. A canvas of who she became above. A layered identity, like New Orleans itself. Beauty painted over sorrow. Truth hidden behind survival. As scholars embraced new interpretations, the city's residents added their own layers of myth. Taxi drivers claimed that every February, the month of both Amara's escape and the Bellamy disappearance, a faint feminine humming drifted through the corridors of the Dauphine Street Hotel. Housekeeping staff swore that when they entered the hidden room, the air would suddenly feel cool even on the hottest days. The manager dismissed these tales, but the staff whispered them with conviction. Older residents of the French Quarter embraced the stories. One elderly Creole woman who lived nearby claimed that as a girl, she once looked into the empty windows of the mansion and saw a woman in a blue gown, gazing back with an expression that was not sorrow, nor anger, but resolve. She never forgot the face. Historians, of course, rejected such accounts as folklore, but New Orleans has always lived comfortably between fact and legend, between the documented and the whispered, between the living and the dead. Still, what could not be dismissed were the final archival discoveries that surfaced in 2021 and 2022. In 2021, a London church archivist digitizing old correspondence stumbled upon a letter written by Amara herself in 1870.